Hey guys, Andrew Esquivel here, back with another review, and today I'm going to be reviewing a new build plate surface from Fulament. This is because I needed a new one because my previous PEI based sheet had failed. Now this one's a bit different because on one side we have a layer of PEI, in the middle is spring steel, which is flexible, but on the other side we have powder-coated PEI, which is nice and textured. Now there's various reasons as to why you would use one over the other, but the fact that this comes with both in one is quite handy. It is magnetic, and it comes with a magnetic surface that you can apply to your printer if it did not already come with one. My printer is a Creality Ender 3, and I had chosen the one with the magnetic build surface from the factory that came with this, and I've destroyed this as well because that was never designed to print PETG with, and this is why I got this, because I print PETG and I need a surface that can handle the excessive build plate temperature as well as the excessive hot end temperature that is extruding the plastic onto the surface. Needs to be strong, needs to be durable, and it needs to stick well on the first layer. So, let's give this a shot and see how it does. Before we perform our first prints on this new build plate, I want to go over with my macro lens the surface of this flat PEI side, because these are applied much like a sticker, and sometimes when they're applied incorrectly there are bubbles that are visible on the PEI sheet, and that can be problematic. However, going over with my macro lens, just to show you guys a little better, I don't really see any bubbles. There's nothing that would suggest to me that there's going to be any problems. Another thing that I feel is worth noting is if you use an auto bed leveler, not like the BL Touch that has a physical probe, but instead has a type of proximity sensor, like the TH3D Easy ABL I have right here, they tend to be more accurate on surfaces like this because there is a solid spring steel sheet that it is sensing against. And in order to kind of quantify that, I'm going to run a test to see how accurate the sensor is. Because there are two different types of surfaces on this build plate, one being a smooth surface and the other being textured, and because we're using a proximity-based auto bed leveling sensor, there may very well be a difference in standard deviation between each side. So what we're going to do is run what's known as an M48 test in order to gauge the standard deviation that we'll see from each side. Now this, and the machine will begin its test. And here is our result for the flat side, 0.001436. We now have the powder-coated side ready to go. We just simply flipped it over. All the temperatures on the bed and hot end are the exact same as before, and we're just going to run the M48 test once more and see how we do. And we have our results, 0.001446. Both results are very good and are perfectly adequate for a good auto bed leveling experience. Now that I've heated up the build plate for the first time to 90 degrees Celsius, I am starting to notice these bubbles all across the surface. And it goes across pretty much the entire surface, and I got the macro lens and the camera to try and help you guys see it. We'll have to see if this impacts the performance or the quality of the print in any way. So as you can see, we're putting down our first layer of PETG, Now, I have not adjusted the baby stepping yet from my previous build surface, so there could possibly be some slight adjustments that need to happen. But looking at the first line, it seems to be pretty spot on. We now have a finished print that has a large raft that is directly on top of this PEI coated spring steel. Now, some people use certain chemicals like hairspray and alcohol to help assist in the removal of PETG from these surfaces. However, because I print products specifically for aquarium use, I try to avoid any chemicals as much as possible. So, I'm going to try and figure out if this surface is good enough to print PETG on without using any sort of chemicals to remove it. So, we've got this here, and what we're going to do is we're going to flex this build plate surface, because we're going to try to remove it from the surface. This build plate has cooled down, by the way, and as you can see, it has removed from the surface. However, let's take a closer look at the surface. There are some remnants of bubbling and possible slight damage from the super high temperature. If I feel it right here, it's a very tiny bulge, which that may have been from when the build plate was hot, and previously I had shown there was a bunch of bubbles. Now that it's cooled down, I don't see those bubbles anymore. But bubbling means there's some sort of air or some sorts of mixture of some sort of gas that's been trapped underneath this PEI layer when it was applied. So there could be some separation of the PEI layer from the spring sheet. We also have this powder coated side. It should be much more durable. So we're going to do the exact same print on the powder coated side and see how it fares. So right now we are putting down the first layer, and this is part of the raft. Now it is a little difficult to see because my PETG is clear. When I make parts for my aquarium, I don't use anything with dyes, so it can be a little difficult to see, but it's putting down a decent layer. It seems to have absolutely no trouble putting the first layer of this raft down on here with PETG. I would suggest, though, that you adjust the baby stepping up just a little bit, because if you don't, you are technically squishing the PETG further into the textured surface than you need to. If you're printing PLA, I imagine that's perfectly fine. PETG sticks so well to pretty much anything anyway that I don't think it's necessary to have it force any of the molten plastic into the crevices of the textured surface for any sort of assistance in layer adhesion. Now that the print in PETG has finished on the textured powder-coated side of this build surface, we're going to attempt to remove it and see how that works compared to the smooth side. So, camera focused here. Everything's cooled off. It's been cooled off for several hours now. We should be able to flex the build surface here. And that came off beautifully. I actually like that way better than the smooth side here. That definitely was an easier removal, because PETG, as I've said before, kind of likes to weld itself to pretty much anything, and I was actually somewhat expecting it to stick better on the textured side due to how plastic kind of fills in the crevices of a textured surface, but this came off exactly the way I wanted it to, so I think it makes more sense to print something like PETG on this side. The powder coating is, in theory, much stronger than the stickered side of PEI, so you have a lot of options with this particular model. And actually, looking at the flat surface, there were imperfections that showed up when I removed this, when I printed in one of these versions on this side that I had mentioned earlier in the review. I don't see those issues anymore. They seem to have disappeared. So part of me is thinking that those bubbles are only showing up when the build surface here is heated up. I'm not quite sure why, but looking at it when it's cold, I don't see any problems. So, for all intensive purposes, this seems to be pretty good so far. The next thing to do would be to print PLA, but I don't think that's necessary because the main reason I got this was to print PETG. So, I think I've found a surface that is going to work for me. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this demonstration, because this is, I went into this not knowing if this would work well, and I'm glad to report that as it stands, this seems to have worked the exact way I wanted it to on the powder coated side.